Sorry, professors, we need to wait till it goes live. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nishita Biswas, and I'm an undergraduate student currently pursuing English honors in Rani Billa Girls College, Kolkata. I welcome you to the stories of tribal identity and culture that will explore the role of cross culturalization of tribal communities in shaping cultural identity and ideology, curated under TMYS Review December 2024 in collaboration with Central of Asia Pacific Initiatives, University of Victoria. We are also calling for the submission of essays, poems, and short stories under the project. To know more about the submission guidelines and the project architecture, please visit www.yourstory.tellmeyourstory.biz. This evening, I consider myself very privileged to be in the company of our esteemed panelists, Dr. Preeta Birkelund Andersen, Dr. Priyanka Ghosh Dr. Korsi Kharshiing, and Dr. S. Janet Mary. Dr. Peter will be joining us shortly, and I would like now start with our panelists to share their views and insights with us. The topic of today's discussion is the role of literary and artistic translations in cross-culturalization. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our speakers. I begin with our first speaker, Dr. Priyanka Ghosh. Dr. Priyanka Ghosh, PhD SET, is an assistant professor in English, presently working in Mount Carmel College, Autonomous, Bangalore. She has 8 years of teaching experience at PG and UG level. She is a certified reviewer of the Web of Science and Taylor and Francis journals. She has delivered guest talk at various organizations and online platforms. She has several international and national publications. The passionate academician and researcher takes research interest in the diverse areas of indigenous studies, marginal studies, nonfiction writing, eco-critical studies, and post-human studies. She has been awarded the Exemplary Excellence Award in the teaching several times. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Dr. Ghosh. Thank you for joining. Moving on to our next speaker, Dr. Korsi Kharshiing. Dr. Dorene is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology, Jamia Millia Ismailia, New Delhi, India, and is a coordinator for field training of MA Applied Psychology students. She hails from Shillong, Meghalaya in northwest India. Her research interests span issues of identity, gender, intergroup relations, health and mental health in psychology. She has over 12 published articles and has presented several papers in conferences or seminars. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Kharshiing. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Nishita.
Moving on to our next speaker, Dr. S. Janet Mary. Dr. S. Janet Mary is an assistant professor in the Department of Communication with 15 years of teaching experience. She has started her career as a full time social worker in Maharashtra, Nagpur, Bihar, and Tamil Nadu. She has published 3 books and written over 20 articles. Dr. S. Janet Mary's research interests include media and society, gender studies, and social impact of media. She is known for her engaging teaching style and commitment to student development. She is also the recipient of Global Femina Excellence Award 2022. We are pleased to have you with us this evening, Dr. Mary. Thank you for joining. Moving on to our next speaker, Dr. Peter Birkelund Andersen. Born in 1956, Dr. Peter Birkelund Andersen, PhD, is Associate Professor at the Department of Cross-Cultural and Regional Studies at the University of Copenhagen. He has completed between 5 to 6 years of work in India and has published on the Santals, the Bodos, and civil society in India. His research focus is on religion in modernity. He has recently published on the Santhal Rebellion 1855 to 1856 and on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic in Denmark and in India. We are delighted to have you this evening, Dr. Andersen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting. I'm honored.
We will now open the forum for discussion. I would request Dr. Andersen to share his views and insights. So, over to you.
Thank you so much. You have sent me some questions on tribes and sansals, on what, how.
So, we will be discussing the question and answer on the question and answer session. We want you to share your views on the topic before that.
The important tribes and my feeling is that the mainstream media in India tend to externalize tribals people, that they tend to present them either as a little bit primitive, weird, out of the mainstream. They are out of the mainstream. That's a reason for being tribal, but they are also presented in a way where we do not, when one do not recognize them for their own being, for their own values, and do not recognize how they are able to manage themselves and how they are uh, able to develop their culture and religion on their own terms. Mainstream media tend to close on the weird or not so easy understandable elements of tribal culture and do not tend to present the tribal peoples as a people moving in complex realities and being able to adapt themselves in proper ways. You can always find some case, or you can find lots of cases where the mainstream media deal properly with Santals and Bodos, which are the tribes I know best, but you can also find issues where they are presented as violent and as being unable to understand how they fare best in India. In this way, you can see them as being marginalized in the mainstream media. For when you look at the coverage of tribal peoples, it's investigated in Tamil Nadu that they are covered much less than other groups in India. And in this way, they are not giving the same attention. This is known. What we do not have in clear research documentation is this impression I have of how they are not giving proper given proper attention and respect in the presentations of them. And here it's my feeling from the reading of the literature, reading of the newspapers mostly, that they are presented as not being able to manage themselves. And in this way, the mainstream media tend to cut their culture down and give a paternalistic presentation of them. Shall I just continue? I cannot hear your voice.
You're
Sorry for
muted.
the technical issues. Thank you so much for the insightful observation, Dr. Anderson. I now request Dr. Priyanka Ghosh to share her views on the topic. Uh, Ma'am, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. So, whenever there is a discourse on subaltern studies, it centers around two prime foci, that of the subjugation of the community and their socio political scenario. And finally, it culminates into the resistance by the same. Right. This is a very cringe, a very cliche, a very stereotypical way of presentation. Now, when it comes to tribal studies, many people, they do not have that clarity of the difference that we have from Dalit studies and tribal studies. Because when you are going through Dalit studies, you need to analyze it from the caste point of view, and when you are going through tribal studies, you need to analyze it from race and class point of view. So people usually, there is a kind of inception of a very vague knowledge of caste and class. They often seem to intermingle between the same. So that clarity needs to come first, the difference between caste and the class. Now, specifically when we are coming to tribes or the tribal studies, the first disclaimer that I would like to give is we cannot homogenize, we cannot generalize the tribes, right? We obviously we are bringing them under one umbrella term, but each tribe has their own unique, identity, own unique culture, beliefs, faith, practices, and it's very much different from the other tribe. So we need to focus our expertise on any one. So far, my belief, because 8 9 years back when I started with my research on tribes, I picked up Santhal community, because and obviously I need to foreground my theoretical knowledge of the tribes, and then I slowly moved into Santhal studies. So this is the first thing that I would like to say, that we cannot homogenize. It's like how we are analyzing Santhal community or Santhal tribe, it will be suitable for any other community also. So far, my belief, it cannot be so, because each one of them are unique in their own ways. Each one of them has their own faiths, beliefs, and trust. So this is what is the introduction that I would like to say. Now, when it comes to mainstream media, what is mainstream media? Like, we have understanding mainstream media is definitely, newspaper, television, publishing houses. These are the mainstream media that we focus on. Now I would like to focus on one particular thing of tribal writers, especially Santhal writers, the plight, the distraught that they face. The women writers of the community of Santhal community, they often come up with the idea that they write about the problems, the challenges that the women face in the community, right? Not, I'm not generalizing that all the women face, because within the community also binary exist, the privileged and the non-privileged Santhals. So if the challenges of the non-privileged women are being identified and written, the women writers, the challenge that they face is the first thing, as per Ruby Hemram, she says that we don't find readers, because about whom we are writing, they do not understand. And there is another problem with the script, because Santhal script, most of you will be knowing that they have multiple script. They have Roman script, they have Old Chiki, which is their official script. So even if the writer is writing in Roman script, it's not mandatory that others will be understanding, because they have their understanding on Old Chiki script. They have their understanding on the other script. There are total 5 scripts. So first is the about whom they are writing. They are unable to decipher, they are unable to understand the challenges that are being portrayed. They do not understand. Number 2 is the script. Number 3, the main interesting fact, as Ruby Hemram says, she's actually is from IT profession, but her love for literature has actually driven her to write about the entity, about the Santhal history. And when she carried her manuscript to the publishing houses, she faced her first setback when the publisher said that she had a demand that the hard copy of the book should be black in color. Now, the publishing house, it was a first setback, said that black is too sophisticated a color to be used. Why not choose yellow or maroon? Now, this was the first setback that she faced. The next publisher, what was said was, uh, tribal writing, or this kind of writing by the tribal writers, are not so good. This is what she says, and I quote. And because there is a kind of understanding that the people from these communities, they are usually non-intellectual, non-creative. This is a kind of very vague understanding by the mainstream society. So these were the setbacks that she had faced, and that finally resulted in the setting up of her own publishing house, which is known as Adivani. Back in 2012, she had set up her own publishing house, and that is a platform which gives, scope to the people from the community, the budding artists, the budding writers. They do not have to go to the other publishers. They do not have to, go and beg for publishing their articles. So this is how Adivani Publishing House was set up. Now, another thing that she says is, even if we take example of Dr. Saurendra Shekhar Hansda, Dr. Saurendra Shekhar was actually, he's a physician turned into a writer, and now he cannot be categorized only as a tribal writer. The kind of writing that he has written, be it Mysterious Element of Rupi Baski, or Jwala Kumar and the Adventure of Champak Bagh, and if you take My Father's Garden, which is again the gay novel is introduced, the genre of gay novel which is introduced in this whole scenario of Santhal studies. And then she has this epoch making short story collection called Adivasi Will Not Dance. So even Dr. Saurendra Shekhar Hansda has said that he had to go to various publishing houses to get his work published. And we know, because if you have read his books, you will be knowing there is so much of diversity. He breaks this stereotypical presentation of where, we have a kind of feeling that if the writing is coming from the community, it often has a kind of self pity or indignation. But the kind of writing that Saurendra Shekhar Hansda writes, you will be able to understand that it is both from the insider's point of view as well as from the outsider's point of view. He does not indulge himself into a kind of indignation or self pity. So if you read Mysterious Element of Rupi Baski, you will find it gives a clarity of the locale, the space, the culture, the faith, the practices. On the other hand, if you read the short story collection like Adivasi Will Not Dance, if you read the first short story, They Eat Meat, where there is an issue of migration. The family who they are involved into, they belong to privileged Santhal family, and they have migrated to Gujarat and they settle down there. And the culinary practices, the challenges they face, and also the resistance that the protagonist get involved into is not a kind of the conflict between the center and the margin. This is a kind of resistance where the protagonist involves herself very much a part of the mainstream society, because that was a communal disarmament. So this is how, the writers, they are breaking the stereotypes and we get a fair portrayal. So why not the publishing houses, the media, they give a fair presentation of the same. Because, and what I feel, let this kind of writing become up, not from merely, an interest point of view, but also from an identity point of view. Because then what we get, the realistic stories. So this is how, what I feel about the writers, the plight of the writers, especially the women writers, or be it the male writers. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this invaluable perspective, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah.
Our next speaker, I would like Dr. Korsi Dorene Kharshiing to share her views on the topic. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Nishita. I think for me, this topic personally is a very personal one because I myself am a tribal. I belong to the Khasi tribe of the state of Meghalaya in Northeast India and have been living in Delhi now close to almost 3 decades. So I think negotiating my tribal identity in so-called quote unquote, I think which is also still contested mainstream or mainland India is something that in fact, it resonates, I think, very, very personally. So I think when we talk about breaking stereotypes and fair portrayals of tribal cultures in mainstream India as a topic, I would say personally, as a woman, as a tribal, and also as somebody who is in the academic world, I would say that there's not much that has changed in the 3 decades that I've seen, at least here in a city like Delhi, in a metropolis like Delhi, where perhaps I think the depiction or portrayal of tribals is still boxed into a stereotype of being, I think Priyanka mentioned, and I think Peter also mentioned earlier, I think barbaric, primitive, even in terms of their culinary practices and their food preferences. So, and I think all of this is also by virtue of the fact that ethnically, racially, they're quite distinctive in their features, even though I think we all know that there are different tribes and there are different tribal communities spanning the entire country. I think northeastern tribals will differ quite substantially from tribals in central India or in Orissa and so on and so forth. But what for me, for example, I think resonates in terms of the topic and its relevance is the fact that there is still, I think, an exotic, exaggerated depiction or portrayal of tribal communities that perhaps might be removed, if not far removed, but removed from the realities of their day-to-day existence. And personally speaking, as I've said, when I came to Delhi for my admission from my home state of Meghalaya in the northeast of India, I think I was made very conscious of my scheduled tribes status. Firstly, because I think being a majority tribal in my own home state, I was not very aware and neither, I think, very conscious of this ascribed sort of identity that I had. And secondly, I think being a beneficiary of reservation for admission as a tribal, that also, in fact, was something that I learned in the process of negotiating and at sometimes also of um, I think, weighing in on how this has bearing for me as a tribal. And this heightened sense of identity, in fact, was seen very, very palpable from that time when I came in 1995. And today, in the 21st century, in 2024, I would still say that I negotiate my tribal identity, even in the landscape of Delhi, in terms of my work, in terms of the community that I live in or the neighborhood that I live in, and so on and so forth. So part of, I think, the experience of being tribal, which I think this discussion today touches on, is largely, I think, the stereotypical portrayal of the tribal way of life, of tribal culture by the media, particularly mainstream media. And of course, I think we also have to acknowledge that social media, to a certain extent, or rather, in fact, I would say personally, to a great extent, fuels this lack of authentic knowledge about such communities. And therefore, dismantling stereotypical beliefs which are ill informed sometimes would, in fact, personally speaking, and I think there is enough theorization in psychology that talks about quality contact, quality interaction as being one way to dismantle or to do away with, let's say, for example, unfair depictions or inauthentic depictions and portrayals of such groups. And the contact theory, I think, attests to betterment of intergroup relations in this context, let's say tribals and non-tribals, or tribals and other groups and other communities through such qualitative and meaningful interactions. And I think as a tribal woman also, the ability to feel empowered to challenge stereotypical beliefs of who I am and what I am as a tribal in terms of my social, my personal, my cultural life enables me to dismantle the same. And I think also when I got this topic, I think what made me also dwell, which is not often talked of, but I think people do tend to acknowledge, perhaps personally, is that there is also a very, very indirect, I would say, covert, even I would say, questionable um, um, a questionable understanding, or rather a questionable opinion of the abilities of tribal people. I don't know. I think it was Peter, it was Priyanka that touched on that earlier. That there is also the questioning of the abilities of tribal people, and I think the bestowing of scheduled tribe status on tribals in India and the affording of reservation benefits oftentimes calls to question their competence. And I experienced that personally myself. I think I can acknowledge in this forum that sometimes, many a times, I felt that my competence has been called to question and I was deemed whether I was meritorious or not. And this often, in fact, has a lot to do with my own identity, my own tribal identity, which many a times, sometimes I do tend to free myself of, so that this perception can actually be rid away. And therefore, I think debates, even on mainstream media, about reservation, let's say, for example, does have bearing on tribal people. And them availing of such affirmative actions, let's say, for example, do have implications on their mental health, on their well being. And this also, in my opinion, fuels the sense of otherness that they feel, particularly when they move out of their own regions or their own home states. And in my own, in fact, research, in the last few years that I looked at, particularly I looked at identity of my own tribe, of the Khasi tribe, and I focused on the otherness that perhaps is fueled by the sense of identity, which is largely social and also ethnic, and how their identity has implications on the creation of boundaries, the enabling of comparisons, let's say, with other non-tribal groups, particularly in my state. And in this context, I found essentially that when we talk of otherization, let's say, for example, there's a lot of portrayal, there's a lot of talk that Northeasterners have been discriminated, have been othered, and this largely is attributed to stereotypical ideas about them as a people, culture, about their way of life, particularly, as I've said, when they go out of their home states to metropolitan cities or other smaller cities in India for either work or either studies. And their way of life and their distinctive physical features sets them apart. But in my own research, I also found that perhaps this otherization of Northeasterners is not limited to them being otherized when they go out of their states or they go out of their hometowns to metropolitan cities, but it also fuels the reverse kind of racism that exists back in their home states to non-tribals. So I think that also has um, does have implications in terms of the politics of identity that looks at not only tribal identity and tribal ethos as very central to understanding intergroup relations, but also in terms of the geographical, you can say, history, the political history, the politics, and also, I think, the sociology and the anthropology of the region, particularly of Northeast India in this context. And the understanding of people, therefore, is made way better if there is a clearer understanding of all of these factors, I think, that mitigate the understanding of how tribals are represented, not only in mainstream media, but also in terms of you can say, living room discussions, or even a layperson commonplace understanding of who or what a tribal is. I think this is what I have to share in terms of, I think, the topic today. Thank you so much, Nishita.
Thank you for the vital observations, Dr. Kharsing. It was really insightful. Over to our final speaker, Dr. Janet Mary. Ma'am, the forum is all yours.
Thank you, Nishita. So, the panel discussion on breaking stereotypes and fair portrayals of tribal culture in mainstream media presents a profound reflection on the experiences and aspirations of indigenous community. So, as I was going through a few literature, I found that according to the 2011 census, the tribal population in India is approximately 100 and not million, which is something 8.6% of the total population. So this total population is spread across various states and union territories in India, with a significant concentrations in states like Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, and Gujarat. So, having this as a background at the outset, I should say that as a member of an indigenous fishing community, My journey through PhD studies was marked by a deep sense of unease at the glaring absence of mainstream media coverage of our own communities, too. So, moreover, the trauma of witnessing the tsunami's devastation further underscored the need to address the marginalization faced by these communities also. Similarly, the tribal narratives are often sidelined, not due to any lack of beauty or trickery, but because of their geographical and cultural isolation. Their stories, struggles, and unique way of life remain obscured, denying them the recognition and support they deserve. So my goal has been to shine a light on these communities and advocate for their rightful place in mainstream media. As I analyze deeper, it is my experience that the socio psychological complexities that shape tribal existence, their lifestyle, their ancestral roots, deeply influenced by geographical isolation, is enchanting. In this connection, I should say the role played by the missionaries in educating our own community, leading to a significant increase in education among the younger generation, catalyzed by the tsunami's aftermath, goes beyond any human appreciation. However, I feel there is a gap in understanding and portraying the original cultural richness of tribal communities. Most of us, including the mainstream media, are biased or keep away from its main agenda. We isolate them from our mainstream line of the modern civilization. We are caught up in the web of stereotype portrayal of this group, which is rather negative. So, our discussion today underscores the urgency of dismantling stereotypes and ensuring a fair portrayal of tribal culture in Indian media. Tribal communities, historically marginalized and misinterpreted, have been burdened by stereotypes that fail to capture the depth and diversity of their cultural heritage. Central to this effort, it is my earnest desire that the need for media to showcase the richness of tribal culture, including their unique traditions, languages, arts, and sustainable practices. By doing so, media can dispel misconceptions and foster a more nuanced understanding of tribal life. I have also come across few examples. A film by Newton, which sensitively portrays tribal challenges during elections, and the photography of Sudhakar Ole, which captures the dignity and strength of tribal communities, highlight the power of media in challenging stereotypes. Likewise, we have few examples that has recently happened here and there. The Dongria Kond and the Niamgiri Hills. This is the tribe in Odisha. They fought against mining companies that threatened their sacred lands in the Niamgiri Hills. Their story gained international attention and highlighted the struggle of tribal communities to protect their environment and the way of life. Another story of Baiga tribes, their struggles for recognition, that is, from the central India faced displacement and loss of livelihood due to conservation projects and government policies. Their story showcases the impact of development on tribal communities and the need for their voices to be heard in decision making process. The another example of the Warli artisans from Maharashtra. So this art is known for its traditional art form, Warli painting. Despite its cultural significance, Warli art was not widely recognized until recently. So, through advocacy and awareness efforts, Warli artists have gained recognition for their unique cultural heritage. So, these stories represent just a fraction of the 104 million tribal people in India. To truly uplift and represent all tribal communities, we need increased involvement from NGOs, missionaries, and government initiatives focused on their well being. Media, as the fourth pillar, plays a vital role in this effort by creating platforms that showcase tribal culture to the world, fostering understanding and appreciation for their rich heritage. I propose there could be more documentaries, YouTube channels, and government aided web series that could limelight the richness of tribal culture. Moreover, collaboration between media and tribal communities can lead to the creation of content that authentically represent their experiences. By centering tribal voices in storytelling, media can ensure a more genuine portrayal of their lives. In conclusion, promoting a fair portrayal of tribal culture in mainstream media requires a commitment to inclusivity, empathy, and cultural sensitivity. By embracing the diversity and richness of tribal culture, media can play a crucial role in fostering mutual respect and understanding among all communities in India.
Thank you so much for sharing your insightful observations, Dr. Mary. We will now move on to the question and answer sessions. So, my first question is to Dr. Andersen. So, from a sociological perspective, how do you perceive the portrayal of tribal culture in the mainstream media, and how has that impacted the religious practices and perceptions within the communities? Sir, you're muted. If you can unmute yourself.
Sorry. The mainstream media are paternalistic towards the tribes. But I think that the tribes, in many ways, are in dialogue with the mainstream media and the portrayal of them, both in the media as newspapers and radio and TV, and in the printed media or printed books. And I think that tribal people are in this way in dialogue where they adapt and change their culture into a more all India culture. When tribes, Bodos, and Santals go for education, they are becoming part of a all India culture when they go into all India governmental schools type. They are changing their basic notions of uh, right and wrong and their basic expectations to other people as schools teach all and everyone common rules, and they are able to forward demands in uh, terms where they demand the same from other people as other people demand from themselves. Then come the problem that the media often put them down. And here, Janet Mary's uh, insightful considerations are important. It's also important that events like this today and events where tribal literary associations and other sit down and consider what to tell the mainstream population and try to forward and build up some writers and um, artisans who address the mainstream, not only the tribal communities. Suvendra Hasta is one person who have done it successfully, mostly by himself. Uh, Ruby Himbram have had the fort and succeeded, but it's still a niche where tribal peoples have to move beyond. Then, what comes to the religion, in some way, tribal people adapt to religious taboos and rules from outside, but they also adapt their own culture in ways which fit and where they see that fit. Among the Bodos in Assam, there was a Kamadama or Kamodoro, which worked for or works for education, but also for change in culture, change in ritual behavior in ways which are fitting general Indian ways of behaving ritually. Then, among the Buddhas, as among the Santals, there are numerous ways to work towards the all India and to define oneself against others. The important is that there is a continuous exchange, uh, allowing for a number of different interpretations and strategies to be developed among the tribal peoples to be part in a larger community than they had been 150, 200 years ago. But it's a continuous adaptation and change.
Thank you for your answer, Dr. Anderson. My next question is to Dr. Priyanka Ghosh Datto. Ma'am, my question to you is, how do you perceive the depiction of tribal cultures in the media contributing to discussions about the ethics of representations inherent in storytelling?
Yeah. So, not every time I would say, but yeah, sometimes media has a very one dimensional way of presenting. As I have said, a very cringe, a very cliche, a very stereotypical way of presenting the tribal narratives. And that often end up by with a problem. As I was discussing about Dr. Saurendra Shekhar Hansda, many of you will be knowing that one of his books got banned back in 2017 for his short story November is the Month of Migration. And I'm not getting into the details of that because altogether that's again a controversial issue. But the fact is that politics and media, they both have sensitized it even farther. And Dr. Shekhar himself says that many people who were in that propaganda of bringing a bad name to him, many of them haven't yet read the book, many of them haven't yet read the story. So it's all about, this media and politics. They played a dual role in sensitizing the whole issue. Now, if that is one part of media, there is again a good side that I would like to say. If you see the environmentalists like Tulsi Gaura or Thimakka, these are the ladies who are actually whose work have been identified and they have been awarded the Padma Shri award. And also recently, like our Punnamasi Jani, even she was also awarded the Padma Shri award for her contribution to writing 80,000 and above devotional songs in Sanskrit, Oriya, and Koi language. And the PM himself has bowed down and stooped to touch her feet. So even this kind of people are acknowledged, they are recognized, and they are awarded. So media has obviously the dual face. If one way they are presenting a kind of very stereotypical and sensitizing the issue, on one way they are also acknowledging. We cannot totally say that media is all bad and they are presenting in that shade. Media is also recognizing and bringing this kind of people to the forefront, where we are acknowledging them. So this is what I would like to say.
Thank you for your answer, ma'am.
Yeah.
My next question is to Dr. Kharshiing. Ma'am, do you believe that the concept of cognitive dissonance might come into play when individuals encounter conflicting portrayals of tribal cultures by the media? And how can it be addressed through media literacy efforts?
Thank you, Nishita. I think definitely cognitive dissonance is created, or dissonance is created when people's understanding of tribes and their cultures are actually at odds with their portrayal in the media. And I think this mental discomfort that may lead people to then change their beliefs of tribal cultures to restore a sense of balance and also to reduce discomfort is also attempted too. But in my opinion, they may choose sometimes to believe stereotypes or these stereotypes because challenging them would actually entail that they be informed, would actually also involve them as into seeking whether the knowledge or the information rather that they obtained or that they are exposed to is actually genuine or authentic or not. And therefore I think they may live with this discomfort or this dissonance. And as far as media literacy efforts are concerned, I think it is possible through media literacy efforts to reduce this dissonance or to reduce this disturbance. And especially when people have access to, let's say, media messages, when they tend to sit, evaluate, and even analyze, and in the course of being consumers of such media content or such information about tribals, about their way of life, about such communities, to also at the same time be responsible when they are disseminating or when they are reproducing or creating or acting on that information. And many a times I think we do not do that. We are quite comfortable. I think we live in the age of information and in the age of technology, even when it comes to mainstream media, that it's easy to I think, be quite complacent and to accept information as it is, and therefore questioning even the agenda of producers of such content. I mean, we talk about media now, and we talk about fake news, or even we talk about even in mainstream media the agenda of media houses to disseminate information. So I think when we talk about media literacy efforts, we are essentially talking about also as consumers, I mean us individually or groups or the collective, I think as consumers of these media messages about tribes and their way of living and their culture, we tend to, I think we have to, not even tend to, have to be responsible enough to know as to whether there is an authentic depiction or not. Otherwise there would be, of course, I think the proliferation rather of such stereotypes. And these competencies, I think, are very essential. These media literacy skills, let's say, for example, of questioning such messages, of evaluating, of analyzing, and also of acting responsibly when you disseminate or when you're producing such content, even in terms of discussions or conversations. I think this is very, very essential, not only to life, but also as responsible citizens. So I think when individuals are media literate, they in fact become wise consumers of media and become responsible, as I've said earlier, of even their own understanding and information. And I think central to all of these efforts, and I think our earlier esteemed speakers did touch on this in some way or the other, is that I think the onus, as I've said earlier, lies also on the individual who is a consumer of this information. And therefore, I think media literacy skills, particularly in today's generation, I'm talking about the young generation here, who is very media savvy, who is, I think, endowed with certain skills that perhaps a person of my generation or an older generation, perhaps we were not really exposed to. We were living in a different age altogether. And I think media literacy skills, therefore, should start at a very young age. And media literacy education, particularly, I think, should be incorporated, I think, into school curricula. And therefore, even information about tribal communities and tribal culture in school that is accurate, that is authentic, as I've said, that portrays the way of life of tribal communities and tribal peoples, that would allow such individuals, even the young ones, to inculcate and imbibe and internalize this accurate, you can say, information about tribes, in terms of them having, of course, then authentic conversations, discussions with their peers, with their families in a community setting, will be much, much more evident. I remember having a conversation with my child. He's a teenager, about the fact that I am a scheduled tribe, and he quickly turned around and said, um, "But that is because you are backward." And I told him that there is a lot more to just being backward. It is also about history. It's also about geography. It is also about the politics of identity, and so on and so forth. So I think there needs to be, when we talk about, I think, media literacy efforts, we're talking also about efforts that is more also at the grassroots. And therefore, I think the need to understand media representations involves a critical understanding of these messages, an evaluation of these messages, and a communication of the same to others, of course, in a very, very responsible manner.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I don't think there could have been a better answer than this. Moving on to my question to Dr. Janet Mary. Ma'am, in your opinion, how can negative stereotypes about tribal culture in mainstream media be effectively deconstructed?
Yeah, that's another question. Good question. There are several ways to effectively deconstruct negative stereotypes about tribal culture in mainstream media. The first point here I would talk about the representation, be it film, media, or literature. They should represent members of tribal communities as common, normal human beings. Stories and portrayals that are grounded in reality, that are empathetic and respectful of different tribal cultures, help to dispel stereotypes. Secondly, as Korsi ma'am said, education also plays a vital role in dispelling stereotypes and promoting understanding among communities. There's a small example here. The National Council of Educational Research and Training in India, they have taken a small effort towards incorporating chapters on tribal cultures, histories, and their lifestyle, contributing in school textbooks. So this initiative aims to provide students with a more comprehensive and nuanced understanding of tribal communities, challenging unfounded stereotypes and fostering respect for India's diverse cultures. So, by including such content in academic curriculum, NCERT aims to provide non tribal community members, especially the students, with a better understanding of the realities of tribal culture. The third point I would discuss here is the self representation. So, tribal community members should be given platforms to represent their own cultures through public speaking and media. It will help to counter misunderstandings and stereotypes they often face. One example of self representation by tribal community members is the TEDx event we must have heard about. So, this was organized by the Indigenous Peoples Forum of Northeast India. In the TEDx event, the members of tribal communities were invited to speak about their own cultures, their traditions, and the challenges they face. So, during the event, tribal community members shared their stories, experiences, and perspectives, offering insights into their cultures and lifestyles that are often misunderstood or stereotyped. By providing a platform for self representation, the event helped to counter misunderstandings and stereotypes about tribal communities, promoting a more accurate and respectful understanding of their cultures. The another point that I would add here is the collaboration. So, collaborating with members of different tribal cultures can help to promote cross cultural communication, because there are different types of tribals in different places, and they all are separated by their own clan itself. So, there need to be some kind of cross cultural communication, understanding, and respect for each other. It will help to shift the negative mindset and demanding cultural knowledge among non tribal community. The last point I would add here is the dialogue. Open and honest dialogue around stereotypes with the members of tribal communities and non tribal members, understanding of their culture, but that will also help to build trust and mutual understandings. These are some of the ways to deconstruct negative stereotypes about tribal culture in mainstream media.
Thank you for the insights, Dr. Mary. Moving on to the second round of questions, I would like to start with Dr. Andersen again. So, your second question is: can consumers of the media also contribute towards accurately promoting the portrayal of tribal culture? If yes, how? So, if you can unmute yourself, you aren't audible.
Sorry. The response is yes. The problem is how. I think I will like to add to Dr. Kharshiing's considerations of consumers, because the single consumer can do not so much, but the organized consumer, and here the organized consumer is any kind of tribal group who discuss and prepare to make an impact, to make a statement. If they have some kind of spokespersons, it's good, because spokespersons addressing a reader's opinion are much more often published like a single one person. And then, of course, famous persons are published because they're considered spokespersons because they're famous. But I will say it is to address the media both in the way of addressing them with readers' opinions, with prepared interviews, where you come and say, we have a good interview, we have a person, we can usually boring economically sell this interview to you, or you can get it for very cheap, meaning that other people are getting voice. Making that is also that the tribal people shall start to consider how to produce their own stories. And that's a way to make an impact. I think this is the main message in how to promote a certain picture. And then tribal people shall be open to other groups wanting to give other pictures of the tribal life and giving space to them. You shall not work against other people who want to give another impact of tribal life than yourself, but you shall in this indirectly collaborate with them in promoting as many stories about tribal lives as presented by tribal people as possible. It's important, I know it from the Santals, where there are so many opinions on how you should develop Santal culture and religion. My recommendation would be to try to promote Indonesian and then to see where it go over the decennia, but also to address the mainstream, saying we are many, we may differ in certain aspects, but come and see, here we can do a lot together. Yeah.
Thank you for your observations, Dr. Anderson. Moving on to my next question to Dr. Ghosh Dotto. Ma'am, how do you feel media portrayals of stereotypes affect societal perceptions of tribal communities?
Yeah. So let me divide this answer in two parts. The first part, let me speak a little bit more about the writers that I was discussing from the Santhal community. As I was discussing about Ruby Hemram, she also says that, what kind of impact the writing has on the mainstream society. In that regard, she says that she wants to write in English, and that is not only the fact with Ruby Hembram, but also the fact with Dr. Saurendra Shekhar. So that's why Dr. Shekhar is more to be considered as an Anglophone writer rather than, a tribal writer. Now, what's this whole reason of writing in English? I understand when it comes to Dr. Shekhar, he was educated in convent school, his parents were both working, and he had a privileged upbringing altogether. But what Ruby Hemram says, she says that I write in English because I know most of the people from my community will not be able to read it or understand it. But my concern right now more is to get validated, to be heard, to nudge through the bookshelves and find a place amidst the writings of the other writers. So we from the mainstream society, we have a whole lot of a stereotypical understanding of, if the writing is coming from the mainstream writer, it has a different understanding, and when it is coming from a tribal writer or from a community writer, it has another perception. So she wants to write in English, and this is the reason that she gives, that I want to write in English. I don't mind if my people understands, but I want to get validated, and I want to get heard. I want to find that place in the bookshelf amidst the other books by the writers of the mainstream society. Now, this is one part of my answer. The another part that I would like to say, yes, it has more than media. Pop culture has a greater impact on the society, and they have a very stereotypical way of presenting the costumes, the way people dress, their language, everything in a very stereotypical way. If you take example of the movies like Asuran or Jaibin, what do they present? They present mostly about the subjugation. It's more about the the oppression of the margin by the center. But yes, there are again movies like Kantara, I would say, where you will find the fair usage, the unique usage of sound and space, which makes the movie stand out of other movies, and it finds a place in the global scenario altogether. So this fair usage of sound and space, this kind of unique thing should also be incorporated, instead of bringing only the hackneyed and the very stereotypical presentation of subjugation. We know the subjugation is existing from time immemorial, but let us now problematize this whole concept of stereotypical presentation and get to the other way of presenting other facts about the tribes too. So this is what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. I couldn't agree more with you. My next question is to Dr. Kharshiing. What role do you believe media illustrations of tribal culture play in influencing viewers' perceptions of cultural identities, thereby fostering a sense of belonging?
Um, I think when we talk about tribal culture and how they're essayed out or depicted in media, and how this shapes the perceptions of those who view such media messages in terms of their cultural identities, I think if the portrayal is positive of that particular ethnic group in the media, it will definitely, I think, heighten the sense of belongingness, the in group feelings that they have, and therefore it will also strengthen their group identity. Negative depiction, on the other hand, I think tends to impact the group in terms of their well being, in terms of the mental health of tribal people, even having implications. In terms of their mental health, whether it is leading to depression, anxiety, or even a low sense of self, and even issues of body image, self stigmatization, among others. Now, these are seen, and therefore, I think in such instances, rallying together of the ethnic group to counter such harmful stereotypes actually is normally evidence. Now, I remember an incident, this was, I think, in 2015, wherein there was a foreign photographer who did a series of photographs of the Khasi community. She did go to the very remote villages in Meghalaya and did take a series of photographs. And these photographs were showcased in some of the photo festivals, some international, some, of course, in India as well. And I think it came to the attention of many in the community that the photographs seems to be very exoticized, erotic, in fact, and many of the photographs were of children. And hence, some have even, of course, expressed reservations that it looked pornographic, and therefore, this sentiment of, I think, one would say, of dismay regarding the portrayal of the community through these pictures or through these photographs was one that many community members took up, as a result of which, of course, I think when it was these series of photographs were published in an e-magazine, they were actually taken down because of the uproar that was, I think, raised by many from the community regarding the portrayal of such. So I think, yes, if, as I said earlier, if the portrayal is positive, there is this heightened sense of us, of we, that tends to, I think, bring the community together, that tends to bind the community and bond them together. But if it is negative, there is this sense of dismay. And I think negative portrayals, as we've seen, I think, in the context of tribals in India, did lead to many, many incidents of harm. In the context of, let's say, the Nido Tanya case in 2014, where it led to the loss of his life, and many, many other incidents, I think, that did show derogation, that did show even discrimination because of such portrayals. And as I think some of our speakers have said earlier, as ways out to tackle these issues or to manage these issues, I think one would, of course, involve not only the individual as a consumer, and I think Peter talked about that. In fact, Dr. Mary also talked about that. I think it requires a sense of understanding by the collective. So yes, I think, in my humble opinion, tribal culture, when it's depicted, do tend to shape perceptions of viewers, and thereby, I think, foster a sense of identity for the communities involved.
Thank you for the answer, Dr. Kharsing. Moving on to Dr. Mary. Ma'am, how do you feel that communication professionals could collaborate with indigenous communities to ensure that their side of the story are authentically represented in mainstream media? Ma'am, you're muted.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, this is a very vital question in the highly digitalized world. Collaboration, communication professionals, and indigenous communities is crucial to ensure that their side of the story is authentically represented in mainstream media. So, first point that I would like to discuss here is about building trust. The communication professional should invest time in building trust and long term relationship with the indigenous communities. This could involve actively engaging with the community leaders, elders, and individuals who can provide authentic perspectives. One simple example that I could give is Bhasha Research and Publication Center. It's in Gujarat. They have actively involved in building trust and long-term relationship with indigenous communities in the region, particularly among the Adivasi communities. So the BRPC, they work closely with Adivasi communities to document and preserve their languages, oral traditions, and cultural practices. They have established community run schools and cultural centers that are managed and led by members of
Ma'am, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but you are muted again.
getting. So the second point is active listening. It is important for communication professionals to actively listen to the concerns and aspirations of indigenous communities through open dialogue and respectful conversations. A deeper understanding of their stories can be gained. Another point that I would like to discuss here is the co creation of content. Rather than imposing preconceived narratives, communication professionals should involve indigenous communities in the process of creating their own narratives. This can be done through collaborative storytelling, seeking input and feedback, and ensuring that the representation is accurate and culturally sensitive. Another example is by an initiative by MS Swaminathan Research Foundation in collaboration with indigenous communities in India. Their aim is to document and protect the traditional knowledge and cultural expressions and intellectual property rights of tribal communities in India. One of the key aspects of the initiative is the co creation of content where communication professionals work closely with indigenous communities to document their traditional knowledge and cultural practices. So, through collaborative storytelling and knowledge sharing, indigenous communities are actively involved in shaping the narratives around their cultural heritage. This approach ensures that the representation of indigenous culture is not imposed from an external perspective, but is instead co-created with the communities themselves, ensuring accuracy, cultural sensitivity, and respect for their own traditions. The fourth point that the media professionals could do is training, and capacity building. So, communication professionals can offer training and capacity building initiatives to indigenous communities members, empowering them to tell their own stories using various media platforms. So, this can include some workshops on media literacy, journalism, and multimedia productions. The last point here is amplification of indigenous voices. So, communication professionals should actively work towards providing platforms and opportunities to amplify indigenous voices in mainstream media. This could involve featuring their perspectives, showcasing their achievements and culture, and providing space for their contributions to be recognized and celebrated. So, these are the ways through which communication professionals can contribute for the upbringing of this tribal culture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mary. This has been a delightful session to say the least. With that, we come to an end to tonight's discussion. I thank each one of you for sharing your knowledge and valuable insights with us. I'm sure our audience had a wonderful time and have learned a lot as well. We are grateful to you all for taking out time from your busy schedules and for being a part of this discussion. It was an absolute pleasure to have you in our company this evening. This is to remind that we are calling for submissions on cross culturalization of tribal communities, the details of which can be viewed on the website www.tellmeyourstory.biz. That's all for this evening. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Nishita.
Thank
Good
you.
Nice
night.